Hey everybody, welcome to our weekly live stream with Bring Me the News of Purple Insider, Matthew Coller and Sam Ekstrom here. And we are finally ready for football, everyone. The NFL season to begin this week. And Sam and I have a lot to talk about as the Vikings get set to play against the Cincinnati Bengals. And we've got lots of predictions to go over. If you haven't read our work, our written work, purpleinsider.substack.com is where we wrote down these predictions. We're going to discuss them along with Vikings and Bengals, break down the matchup a little bit. We'll also take any of your comments if you're watching the live stream and you want to throw them in the comment section. Always happy to answer questions as well. So I think we should start out, Sam, with taking our most reaching prediction that we made on the website and discussing the chances that it actually comes true. So where would you like to start? Because I feel like you were a little more bold than me. I feel like I took out a 4-iron and hit it down the fairway with a lot of my predictions, but I think you were a little more aggressive. So where would you like to begin with trying to project the Vikings 2021 season?
You speak about a 4-iron as if that's an easy club to just strike purely. I don't know if you've seen my golf game, but I just want to point that out. I think probably the Chris Herndon outgaining Tyler Conklin prediction might have been a little bit on the bold side, especially when I've now seen the Vikings unofficial depth chart and Herndon is behind Brandon Dillon on that. That might not bode well for him right away. I think it makes sense because it's going to take a little bit for him to acclimate. But I just look at the tight end depth. Tyler Conklin has never had a 200-yard season. Brandon Dillon has one catch. Ben Ellefson has one catch in his career. So Chris Herndon's the only one who's had like a good starting tight end season in his career. I feel like that's fairly feasible that if he gets acclimated, he could be the number one gaining tight end in this offense. We'll see. I'm banking on sort of a change of scenery being rejuvenating for Chris Herndon. That's going to be a big wild card. Like, is he going to be able to even contribute on Sunday? I don't think we know yet. The team hasn't really seen him at all. I guess I'm trying to figure out where you think I was being that bold. Greg Joseph won't last through the bye week. That's pretty bold.
That's a little bold. Yeah.
That was a little bold.
But no, that is not where I thought you were going to start. I did not think you were going to start with backup tight ends for your boldest prediction. I would say that of the likelihood, it is the least likely that it happens because I think that Tyler Conklin is going to be tight end one for at least the first 6 weeks of the season or something before Chris Herndon would even have a chance. It's possible, but that's not the direction I was thinking that you would go. You predicted that Kirk Cousins would be booed by week 5. Now, is it likely? I think maybe, but I think it's bold in that you're trying to project when Kirk Cousins will be booed, and even that he'll be booed. Now, let me just break this down a little bit. It was not a great preseason for Kirk Cousins. It was not a great training camp for Kirk Cousins. He missed time, and I think that his likability factor for some people started to fade. And there are a lot of folks, including NFL people, Josh McCown told our friend Chris Thomason about this, that see him not getting vaccinated as a connection with leadership. So I think there's a lot of fans who would believe that. And if he struggles, are going to express themselves. In the preseason game, the first one he played in, when he came out, when they said Kirk Cousins, it was like, yeah. I mean, there was not a huge booming eruption in US Bank Stadium for Kirk Cousins. So I think it's very possible that he does get booed, but does it take until week 5? They're on the road the first 2 weeks, but they have important games when they come home. And I guess also I look at their defenses and say that they're playing and say, well, where's the tough defense here? Because you and I made opposite predictions when it came to this. You've got the Bengals. Arizona's defense isn't super scary. You've got Seattle, who hasn't had a good defense in years. You got Cleveland, who is coming off a very poor defensive season. Like, why is that? Why did you pick that particular time to say he gets booed by then?
Kirk Cousins, in his 6 years as a starter, has never begun better than 2-2.
Wow.
Never had a fast start in his career. With the Vikings, he's gone 1-1-2. No, I'm sorry, 1-2-1. He didn't have 2 ties. 1-2-1, 2-2, 2-2. And there's been drama in all those seasons. And I messed it up. He was 1-3 last year because they started 0-3. So it was 2-2, 1-2-1, and 1-3. And he's got Diggs faking a cold. They had the Buffalo game mixed in there. Last year, the first 2 games were a complete disaster. He's a slow starter. I think that you're right. The likability is down. I think that the expectations are up. And when that's the combo, when that's sort of the cocktail that's been mixed into this season, I think the emotions get heightened when you go into a season with these expectations. You have tough opponents at home with Seattle and Cleveland to start, which I think could lead to some struggles. It could lead to, tense moments where he doesn't come through. And then, that Detroit game, that's a team he usually kills, but it also just screams letdown game, sort of reminiscent of Atlanta last year, which was week 6. And I think he got booed in that game. So I don't think it's that ridiculous to think that in a 3-game home stretch during a time of year when he typically struggles, that could happen. So I stand by it. I think I actually had bolder predictions in there than the Cousins booed thing. What else did I say? That Alexander might be their best corner. I thought that was actually a little bolder.
Okay, let's talk about that in a second, and we'll go over mine in a bit. But since your dog captain barked in the background, let's see. Sometimes the dog days of the season hit Kirk Cousins early. Sometimes he can hit a rough patch, if you will. Things can get a little furry there for him, or hairy early on. Okay, I'll stop.
Thank you.
So I had a different prediction for Kirk Cousins early in the season. My prediction is that he is going to win the player of the month, offensive player of the month in October. And the reason I'm predicting that is because just as he has these rough patches to start seasons sometimes, he also ends up getting blazing hot right after. And usually what it depends on is the schedule. And so I'm looking at it right now. He plays at home, the Browns and Lions, the Panthers on the road, and then back home for the Cowboys in the month of October. I mean, to me, that just screams Kirk Cousins gets hot after a slow start. Maybe he gets booed at home, and then they, string together some really impressive offensive performances. But predicting a player of the month is a little on the bold side, I think. But doesn't it feel like we've gotten to the point where you can almost map out a Kirk Cousins season? We've just seen so much. He's played so much football that it went a certain way in Washington, it went a certain way here. And something that I come back to is, as excited as everyone is about the beginning of the season, it also feels like everybody knows. Our friend Sage Rosenfels called it an inevitability last year when he talked about Kirk Cousins and how Viking seasons are going to go as long as he's the quarterback. And I feel like we could both end up being right here. He gets booed in week 3 or something, and then he wins player of the month in October. And that just seems to be who Kirk Cousins will forever be. So as we're predicting it, I think we're predicting both sides of it.
Yeah, I think if you look at maybe a line graph of, win-loss for Kirk Cousins teams, usually the graph's going to go down to start the year, then he's going to ascend, plateau, and then dip again toward the end of the season. He's a great middle of the season quarterback for whatever reason. I mean, I rattled off, the starts of his seasons. Look at the second quarter of his seasons where, he sort of brought that 2018 team back into contention. I think they went either 4-0 or 3-1 in that second quarter. Then the next year, obviously 2019, even though they lost Thielen, they were very hot in October. And then 2020 last year, he got them back in the playoff hunt. So there is always that one stretch where Kirk Cousins is extremely good. You can isolate it on Pro Football Focus and lump him in with Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers and call him a top 5 quarterback. And you wouldn't be lying. It happens almost every year, but there's far too many stretches where he drops off, becomes middling, becomes lower tier in the league. And That's what separates him from being in that category, is that there are too many lows and not enough highs, and the highs don't last long enough.
I remember looking at this with Patrick Mahomes, and I went through his QBRs and his PFF grades and mapped them out on a chart, because what else am I doing with my life? And I put Kirk Cousins next to him, and Mahomes had almost no down games. It was just straight across. And I know we're talking about the best quarterback in the NFL, but he just never has bad games. And with Cousins, it's been when you're flying high, everything is rolling. And then when you're not, it feels like you'll never win a game ever again. And after 100 and something games to an NFL career, it's very hard to see that changing. So I think that our predictions, well, slightly bold of trying to pinpoint exactly when these things happen. I also think that we know that these things are on the way. And that's what, let me tie this in, and then we'll get to some other ones. Tie this into Cincinnati, because in the Kirk Cousins history, this seems like a game where he throws 4 touchdowns and throws for 320 yards. But you also mentioned that there is a thing with Cousins in the beginning of seasons that sort of shows up here. And last year, he ends up with good numbers against Green Bay, but that was entirely from playing behind. He threw a key interception early in that game that ended up getting them behind in week 1. And then the previous year, 2018, they won against San Francisco. But if I recall, Kirk Cousins did not complete a pass in the fourth quarter or something like that he really didn't have a great day. And then it was the next week where he put up huge numbers against Green Bay in 2018. So I guess I wonder what this means for this week. And if we're looking at what we just saw in preseason and training camp, and comparing that also to the fact that Kirk Cousins usually blasts teams like this.
Yeah, I'm a little bit lukewarm on this game, to be honest with you. I see a lot in week 1 where a team... My dog is the worst. I see a lot of times where, teams that are kind of down on their luck, like Cincinnati, their rosters aren't great, but they come out in week 1 and they perform. And, like Cincinnati, I recall in Zach Taylor's first year, they took Seattle to the wire and they lost by a point, and then they lost their next 11 games. Like they've, sometimes bad teams look good in week 1, especially when they're at home. So I'm not convinced that the Bengals are going to roll over at all. I think there's an energy about Cincinnati.
Did you do that on purpose? The rollover, right? The dog pun? Come on.
Yeah, let's say I did. Say I did. Right. They're not going to play dead at all. But, Mike Zimmer is going to come into this game, I think, with probably, a plan in place to capitalize on a pretty weak defense. I think they're going to run the ball a lot. But I don't see Kirk having a massive game, to be honest with you, on the road, after not really having his skill players all preseason. I am a little more tepid about this offense getting rolling right away. I also, and we've talked about this at length, I also don't know what Clint Kubiak is going to bring to the table, but I don't think he's going to really empty the clip in week 1. I think it's safer to give the ball to Dalvin Cook when you're a first-time play caller, sort of like Kevin Stefanski did in his debut when Cook ran for 1 million yards and 2 touchdowns against the Dolphins back in 2018.
Yeah, this reminds me of the game against Atlanta, maybe, where, they came out and Kirk Cousins barely had to throw because Dalvin Cook just ran over the Falcons and the Falcons turned the ball over. And as much as it seems Cincinnati Bengals fans are getting excited, I went back and read some of the reports from their training camp about how their offense just couldn't do anything. And I do think that early in the season, some of these things carry over, not necessarily preseason performance, but sometimes just the performance of a team on a day-to-day basis in training camp and what those practices look like. And the reporters who were boots on the ground in Cincinnati were talking about how this offense is having a lot of rough days. So it might be a lot of hand it off to Dalvin Cook, play strong defense against Cincinnati, and play the football that Mike Zimmer wants to play, and try to make it not matter if Kirk Cousins has a big day or not. I guess I'm just trying to balance a little bit of the history of Cousins struggling early in seasons with the idea that this is not a very good football team. But I think you make a good point too, that you just really don't know in week one. And if there's any time where the results are at their most unpredictable, of course it's week 17 or now 18 when starters don't play, but it's week one. And I think even the gamblers and Vegas have a really tough time with this because they're trying to weigh, well, they added this, they added that. This is a Cincinnati team that has revamped their defense entirely. We don't know what it's going to be. Their entire secondary is different and their defensive line is different. So one thing we do know, though, is that since the Vikings switched to their outside zone system, they can run the football. And there is nobody on Cincinnati's side is going to Akeem Hicks them and just shut that down. And to me, that means usually either a competent or a very good day for Kirk Cousins, and they usually win. Let me circle back now, though, to your predictions. And you talked about Mackenzie Alexander potentially being their best corner. Does that mean you are not confident in Patrick Peterson or Bashaud Breeland?
I think a little bit of both. I think I look at, Peterson dropping pretty linearly the last 2 years with Arizona, where he was, I think in 2019, pretty average. And then last year, you could almost say he was bad. He was almost a liability last year, very penalty prone, gave up a lot more yards, a lot more receptions. And I also believe that could change, but, I still need to see it. Like, I need to see that he still got something. And I think he might. But I think the possibility still stands that he is an average corner. I think that Bashaud Breeland is tough to peg. Like, he's been up and down his whole career. But his analytics have been fine. They haven't been incredible. He's another penalty prone guy, and they're both new in this defense. Mackenzie Alexander, his last 2 years in this system, he was above average. He was good. I mean, 2018, outstanding in the nickel. 2019, pretty good as well. I just think if he finds the average between those 2 seasons, I think he's like a super effective corner. And granted, he's probably playing 500 to 600 snaps. He's probably not on the field as much as Peterson or Breeland. He's probably not on as many islands, and therefore it's not quite as important of a position. But I think he's going to be pretty valuable, and he's in his physical prime. I think he's obviously a lot more mature from what I've experienced with him and what from the coaches have said. So I think that there's a lot actually boding well for him. Whereas, Peterson's and Breeland, for a particular reason, are, signing these 1-year deals, kind of trying to revamp their stock. And, I think that the possibility exists that Alexander is the best corner.
Okay, so I won't use the 4-iron example because it is a little bit of a tough club to hit. Maybe I should say a 7-iron or something. Get a little loft on it to predict that Mackenzie Alexander will be exactly Mackenzie Alexander. Like, he has been a solid nickel corner. And even last year when he was with the Cincinnati Bengals, I think that there was some sentiment that he didn't have a very good year, but by the numbers, it was a Mackenzie Alexander year. If you're saying which one of these guys is the 7-iron, which one of them is the most predictable, it's Mackenzie Alexander. Now, with Patrick Peterson, there's a chance that he drives it down the middle 300 yards and looks great and is just going to extend his career like Terrence Newman with the Vikings defense and with working with Mike Zimmer. And he's just phenomenal. I think there's a chance of that. There's also a chance that this just doesn't work because Patrick Peterson doesn't have much left. And, when we talk about age and players in the NFL, it's always hard, no matter how long we've seen this, it's always hard to understand that 30 is on the other side. Like, these guys come into the league at 20 or 21 years old oftentimes. And so by the time you've reached 30, the mileage on your body is significant. And if you look into corners, even the great corners that aren't Darrell Green, everybody else, if it's not Darrell Green or Deion Sanders, everybody else is pretty much on the other side or getting to be out of the league when they get into their early 30s. And I remember this with Darrelle Revis. How old was Darrelle Revis when he was pretty much done? I think it was like 31. So it's, I think, a major wild card with Patrick Peterson. And I don't think that either one of us could see by watching practice and training camp whether that's going to go either way. I don't know if you feel like you have a sense for it. I don't feel like I have a sense for it.
No, I don't either. I mean, if you look at guys that have been considered maybe a top corner in the league at one point, if you look at their drop-offs, they happen so fast. I mean, they'll go from elite 1 year to trying to get a contract, 2 years later. Josh Norman, I mean, he's sitting on the market forever. He was considered best of the best not too long ago. Revis, you mentioned. Nnamdi Asamoah was at one point, an elite corner in this league, and he just fell off a cliff. So with Peterson, he does sort of have that smaller, a little more, I think, mobile body type that is going to hold up maybe a little longer in this league. But I also haven't gotten the indication that they're going to take it easy on him schematically and give him more zone assignments where he doesn't need to keep up with guys. I mean, Adam Zimmer and Mike Zimmer, in what we've asked them, it sounds like they're really counting on a lot of man-to-man assignments. I don't know. And maybe they're, trying to bluff and sort of set, the Bengals and early opponents up to expect something different. But I think they're going to expect Peterson to be that sort of press corner, man-to-man, lock him down type, which I don't know if he can still do. I mean, the analytics suggest he was much better in zone coverages last year, and I agree that that's probably the way to go. So we'll see how they approach it in week 1.
Yeah. And excuse me, I think it's a really interesting subject of, like, will they have to adapt as they go along? Like, do they want to start out by saying, hey, be the island corner or lock down this one side of the field? And then if they have to switch to his own type of scheme, which they did in the middle of last year when they had guys like Jeff Gladney struggle, then they decided to change things around to his own. But Mike Zimmer has mostly been like, you're on that guy, and that's how it goes. And even their zone coverages usually have man principles, which I just will not get into any further than that. But it always requires you guard that guy. And if he's struggling in that area, that's not going to change. But how they, I guess, deploy his help might be an interesting part of this. I think that Mike Zimmer is a better defensive mind than most of the league when it comes to coverages. And so I think there's some confidence there, but I think it's fair to say that Mackenzie Alexander would be the safest pick of a corner to have a very good season. Now, I'm going to throw one at you. This one might be my boldest. Garrett Bradberry will have a PFF grade over 70 this year. Now, what that means, if you're not a huge PFF person, most of the league was under 70 last year. I think maybe the top 12 guys were over 70. And of course, the best are in the 90s, and they're just on a different level than everyone else. But this would mean that Garrett Bradberry is an above average overall center. That doesn't mean above average necessarily pass protection, but it means the whole package. Bold or not to say that I think that Garrett Bradberry by the end of this year can be at least considered average to above average.
That's pretty bold. If you look at his first 2 years, he was a 58 almost and a 61. His pass blocking is obviously what held him back. Like, basically he was a 40 both years. So well below average, worst in the league last year among starting centers. So he's got to bring that up, I think, to a 60, right? To have a chance at an overall 70. We're getting in the weeds here with PFF, but the pass blocking is so far away right now. And maybe Michael Pierce is a little bit of an anomaly to have to go up against in practice. But if the way that he's held up against Michael Pierce is any indication, I feel like he's still going to have problems with those big defensive tackles. And Pierce is a mammoth man. I get it. But the guys that are coming at him most of the time are 20 pounds lighter. That's still pretty heavy. Like, if they're 320 and he's 285, 290, I still think that's a pretty sizable difference. The run blocking is probably going to be very good. I'm not concerned about that. It's all about the pass blocking. So how do you mitigate? How do you protect him more? I don't know if you can. I think, like, you can do your best to double team and try to, put multiple bodies on the 3 technique or the nose tackle. But in the end, you can't do that all the time because you're going to open up weaknesses on that line, blitzing lanes, what have you, free runners. So he's going to have to hold up one-on-one to a certain extent this year. And I think a 70 might be a little lofty. I would be pleased with a 65 if I'm the Vikings. Just show some progress and don't, like, hey, I don't, if the run blocking drops off a little bit, but the pass blocking is acceptable, like league average, I'm thrilled if I'm the Vikings. You just can't be the worst pass blocker in the league. That is where the Bradberry experience gets pretty harrowing.
Yeah, part of that for me in thinking that he can get there is it's remotely where he was last year before the final 3 games. And Mike Zimmer alluded to an injury that he had and was dealing with last year. And I don't know if it was like a hand or something, but if you pull up his grades, and I know that we're using PFF for everything here, but it matches up with what you see on tape for how he performed in those last couple of games. You see that he was like below 30 in pass protection for 3 straight games. The whole rest of the year, there's a couple of ones that are pretty rough, but a lot of times he is in the middle somewhere. Like he managed himself okay, probably got beat a few times like a normal center that's undersized would in pass protection, but the last 3 games are just atrocious. And I've got to think that that's what Zimmer was alluding to. Now, also, Mike Zimmer did say that Bradberry is unknown. And he kind of, slid that into when he was being asked about the offensive line. He said, well, we got this, and Bradberry's unknown. It's like, whoa, oh, he is. Okay, you guys think he's unknown. And historically, we've seen centers and interior offensive linemen take a jump in the 3rd year. And there have been studies to show this, that they improve by their 3rd year. So that's kind of why I'm putting my chips on this one. But would it surprise me if he still continued to struggle, especially since they play the Steelers defensive line at one point? They have the best defensive line in the league. And, the Packers, again, Kenny Clark, Akeem Hicks is still out there. Like, I think that he has to be around this range for them to have a good offensive line. I mean, that's another part of it is it's kind of like if this guy doesn't ascend to an average guard, I just don't see it. I just don't see how they can possibly be a good offensive line with a guy who's never been a full-time starter at left tackle, guy who's never played guard before. And I think that this is a real sort of, it can pivot one way or the other based on Garrett Bradberry. You're still muted. Probably because your dog was barking.
No, that was just laziness on my part. I couldn't really discern what Mike Zimmer meant when he mentioned Bradberry yesterday, because as we know, sometimes Zimmer, as he's formulating an answer, he'll just mention guys by name with no real connection. He sort of started listing guys after he mentioned the word unknown. And I don't know what he meant about Bradberry, but whether he meant it or not, it is sort of an unknown. And it is probably if you're going into a season where if you struggle, your job might be in jeopardy, that's an unknown to me. And that's sort of the way I feel about Bradberry, right? Because if he has a bad year, they're not picking up that 5th-year option. And then you're looking for the next guy. That sets up the exit ramp for Garrett Bradberry. So that is an unknown to me. And as I've said on previous shows, with the other 3 unknowns, you probably need 2 out of those 3 to be average, right? You can't have multiple weak links on the line, and you need your quote-unquote veterans, O'Neal and Bradberry, to be good. There are so many question marks, and Mike Zimmer still, he kind of hems and haws. He's like, yeah, I don't know if it's a work in progress, but it's not confident. I don't think even he is fully bought into this group that was, I think, probably supposed to have at least 1 promising rookie, maybe 2. He's been frustrated with Darrisaw from the beginning. And I don't know if it's because of Darrisaw specifically that he's frustrated with, or that he believes Darrisaw is good and wants Darrisaw to be participating in this offense. I think that's where his real frustration is that they drafted this guy to start and he can't, and he's not ready, and he might not be ready this year because he hasn't really practiced yet. And he's probably a healthy scratch on Sunday. So it's, Wyatt Davis, same boat. They probably wanted him to contribute, and at best, he's a backup right now. So Mike Zimmer has been dealt this hand. They don't have a lot of flexibility there, and they're just going to have to roll with it, right? And just hope that kind of the coin flips their way these first few games.
Let me answer a couple of questions. We got this question from Patrick. Does Cincinnati really want Jake Browning as a depth quarterback, or is it just a weekly brain pick to be discarded later? Now, this is always a funny thing in football, that the team that you're facing releases a guy, you pick him up, and Mike Vrabel had the funniest line that I've ever heard on this. The Vikings picked up some dude and released him the next week who's a linebacker. And Mike Vrabel was asked, hey, do you think they're picking this guy up to, give him the game plan? And Vrabel said he doesn't know enough to know what we're doing anyway. It was like the most just ruthless dunk on this player. And I think that Jake Browning does know the Vikings offense and their playbook quite well. But the thing is that he doesn't know the game plan. Is there anybody in the league who does not know what a Kubiak offense is basically going to do at this point? That a Kubiak offense is going to, I don't know, hand off a lot, play action. Like the whole training camp is putting in the base offense. But if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, you have no idea what parts of that offense are going to be run. So there are millions of combinations of different things that you could do. You don't know the motions. You don't know the play actions and which times you're going to hand off like that. I don't think that it does a thing. And if Cincinnati is doing that, then I think their coach is a cornball would be my opinion. Like, what do you really think Jake Browning is going to help you with this offense? This has never actually worked.
NFL teams operate with, tenths of percentage points, thinking that, these small margins are going to give them a competitive advantage. Like it's the reason why they're constantly, butted up against deadlines for the injury report and started trying to withhold information. And to answer the question, this is absolutely the Bengals' attempt to glean information, whether it's going to work or not. I think there are certain things that can be like very mildly useful if Browning can say, for instance, yeah, Garrett Bradberry still, struggling against big defensive tackles. Okay, that might be useful, if we want to deploy some stunts his direction or yada, yada, yada. I think that if you want like sort of like high level personnel overviews, yeah, that's going to be somewhat helpful. But I don't think this is a shot in the dark from Cincinnati to try to claim like their next backup quarterback. They've got Joe Burrow. They don't care. This is the Bengals trying to get intel and also, probably swinging and missing in doing so.
That's why I said it's corny. I mean, it seems like something that a team would do in 1972, and the guy would be like, yeah, I stole my playbook or something, right? Like, I made photocopies on the way out. Here it is, but you got to turn in your iPad if you're Jake Browning. And I don't think there was a game way back where somebody did this and they made a big deal out of it. And I think the other team was Peyton Manning, and then Indy ran the other team out of the building. It was like a Peyton Manning backup player, and they supposedly gave whoever the whole offense, and then Manning just ran them out of the building. So maybe they'll even change. My guess is that because of this, they'll change, dare I say, tweak some calls at the line of scrimmage. Like we hear them say certain words all the time at the line of scrimmage. My guess is that they just change a couple of them. It's not that hard. It's only Tuesday. They have to do this every week of their entire careers. So yeah, that's my guess. Another question.
They'll have new code words.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That's a deep cut reference. Yep. Another question here. What is the normal man zone combo splits on average for Zimmer? I think that changes every year. So in 2017, they would have been playing man all the time. I mean, it would have been Xavier Rhodes locks down the best receiver. They probably play man on the other side of the field with Trey Waynes, who could run with anyone, even if he wasn't a great corner, and he's out of this game. But in 2019, they went to more zone stuff with Rhodes struggling. And I think the same thing happened last year where they went to more zone. So I saw some, I don't have access to those statistics like right offhand, but I saw Mike Clay put that out there that, they played more zone last year, so that's going to help Peterson. But I don't think they played more zone because they wanted to. I think they played more zone because they felt they had to, because they were getting roasted one-on-one with a lot of the rookie corners against NFL wide receivers. Wouldn't you say? I think that Zimmer wants to go back to the way he plays defense.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I'm in process right now of trying to find the Adam Zimmer quote where he basically laid out what they're expecting of the cornerbacks. And someone was trying to get him, I think, to say they were going to run more zone. And he more or less said no. Like he said that, no, our corners are in man. And I wish I could find the exact quote, but I think it's going to be a lot of man, at least at first. And they've got the horses to do it, they think. Like they've got corners that in the past or at some point have had success in man, and they're going to get back to what they do. Mike Zimmer started sacrificing so many yards, even with Xavier Rhodes in 2019. Remember, it was weird seeing him play off. He didn't seem totally comfortable with it, with his yardage depth. He was giving up every slant, everything underneath. And even that 2019 team was bending so much. They were right on the verge of disaster, and then they would kind of bow up in the red zone. And last year's team just gave up so many explosive plays. They had so many young players. And that's why none of those corners are around this year. So I think going back in time a few years and trying to duplicate what they had in 16, 17, 18 is the objective. And if they have to play more off, more zone, it'll be begrudgingly on Zimmer's part.
So staying on the defensive side, you and I each made sack predictions. I guessed 12 sacks or more for Danielle Hunter, and that is based on him looking like an absolute monster in training camp and preseason. And Mike Zimmer, a lot of the things where we try to prognosticate is often just based on how Zimmer reacts to stuff, because he is not a poker player. Like, you can read Mike Zimmer most of the time, even if he's trying to give a blow-off answer. He seems really excited about Danielle Hunter. We saw him annihilate people out there in practice. So I'm going to go 12 over. You think that Everson Griffen finishes second on the team in sacks. So let us try to predict what they end up with for sack distribution. I'm going to go with 12 for Danielle Hunter. How do you think it works out for the rest of the folks up front?
So I want to stick close to my overall sack prediction from a previous podcast. I put on record 34 as a team. I think you had 38. So if the total pie is 34, and that might even be running a little low, but I'll stick with it. 34. If Hunter gets a dozen, that leaves 22. So I'll give Griffen 7. I think Griffen gets 7. I think Wanham gets 6. Weatherly gets 2. I'm not really keen on Weatherly this year. And then, divvy up 5 combined between Tomlinson and Pierce. Do you think that either of them are going to have a spectacular total? I do not. I just don't think that's how either of them operate. I don't think that's how the team operates. I think they're strictly here for run stopping. I might be running out of sacks. I don't know how many I have left, but Sheldon Richardson will get involved probably on third downs. I think that third down unit is going to be great. I've seen what they can produce with, situational pass rushers. Afadio Denebo getting 7, Danielle Hunter thrived in that role when he was young. Brian Robinson was pretty good in that when he was old. So those are always advantageous situations. With whatever I have left, give it to Harrison Smith, give some to Eric Kendricks. And there you've got your 34. I don't know if that added up.
Anthony Barr has always gotten pressures, but not a lot of sacks. I'll give Mackenzie Alexander maybe 3. They love to blitz Mackenzie Alexander off the edge. But if I'm giving out of my 38, Danielle Hunter 12, then I would probably give Everson Griffen maybe 6 and Sheldon Richardson maybe 6 to make up another 12. And beyond that, I think it's very hard to say. DJ Wanham, trying to figure out how many sacks he's going to get. I'm not sure if he could play in the league or if he's really good. I don't really know. I haven't seen anything in training camp that made me say, whoa, he is just blowing people away out there. This guy's going to be double-digit sacks. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot of attention on Danielle Hunter this year. Everybody knows he's back. Everybody knows, probably from reports, that he's looked good in training camp. So I would expect that a lot of and we saw this for years with Danielle Hunter getting sacks because of Everson Griffen, where they shift protections to try and add more to Danielle Hunter, and that gives one-on-one opportunities or even opportunities with tight ends. I mean, how many times did I tweet, why is a football team trying to block Danielle Hunter with a tight end? Because it never worked. Well, that's going to be DJ Wanham this year, and I think it's possible that we could see him get a handful of sacks because of that. But in terms of the things that are hardest to predict that we've kind of been going over here as we're attempting to make our predictions, what DJ Wanham is going to bring to the table is one of the harder ones here.
Yeah, no question. And also, is he going to be in sack situations on third down? Because that's where the Vikings have always cleaned up. They have never been a great first down, second down sack team. Even at their best, if you look at the splits, they feast on third and long. They didn't have like any of those last year, and that's why they had, I think, a franchise low with 23 sacks. So when it comes to third down, where they're probably going to get 2/3 of their sack total, is Wanham even going to be on the edge? Because I think that's Everson's spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think Richardson will have a spot on third down potentially. Does Wanham play on the inside? Maybe. Is he on the field at all? Is Weatherly on the, like, where's Weatherly in all this? So the question to me is not, can DJ Wanham do it? That's part of it. But is he going to be on the field in those situations? I think it's possible, but I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be on the edge on 3rd and 10.
Let's, before we wrap up here, talk a little bit more about Vikings Cincinnati. It's a hard matchup to get super jacked for, even though it's football and it's week 1. I would love to know the number of times this week just on the show that I've just said football, because, hey, it's back. It's week 1. But as you go through and look at matchups and things that intrigue you, what is at the top of the list?
Probably Jamar Chase against whatever his assignment is going to be. I'm assuming it's Breland, because we've seen these rookie wide receiver classes the last 2 years come in and dominate. And Chase might be the guy this year. I mean, he could be sort of that next big thing. And as we've seen, it doesn't take long to realize that these guys are going to be really good. So how's that going to work out? Especially when you don't really know what you're facing when you're the Vikings. That's the issue with going up against rookies, is that it's an unknown. So I don't think the Vikings know how much attention they're supposed to pay to him. I don't think they know like how good Joe Burrow is going to be at getting the ball to him, right? T. Higgins was also pretty good, in his first year, but will Chase be sort of their number one target? I think that's possible too. So I want to see what their receivers are going to do against these veteran Vikings corners. They're very young receivers. I mean, it should be advantage Vikings in that regard, but unknowns, first round picks, you just don't know what's going to come of it. And with Burrow coming off injury, I think his effectiveness and accuracy is also in question. So I'm watching, and that's an easy one, but I'm watching the receivers against the cornerbacks.
Is it weird that my matchup is sort of the Vikings offense against itself? I mean, the vibe, the feeling, the conduciveness of the Vikings offense in this game is the most interesting thing to me of all storylines, outside of like, how does Joe Burrow look? Because it's a guy who's the number 1 draft pick in the NFL 2 years ago. I mean, just like, what does this guy look like coming back from his injury after showing signs of being a very good, quarterback as a rookie, right? He showed signs. He didn't like annihilate the league, but that's of course very interesting just from a broader perspective in the NFL, because if he looks great, then a lot of people are going to jump on the, whoa, Joe Burrow, let's watch out for him in year 2 here. But in terms of trying to take something from this game outside of a win or loss that tells us about the rest of the season, week 1 sometimes does. Last year it did. It showed us that the Vikings can put up some points, but they certainly can't stop anybody who's good on offense. And that was how it played out the whole year. And I think 3 years ago with 2018, we saw the offense can be good, but also can really hit the skids sometimes against San Francisco, just right off the very bat in week 1. 2019, week 1, we saw they can run over anybody who doesn't have a good defense. So what's this going to tell us? Is it going to tell us, hey, all that stuff from preseason and training camp, it's all in the past, and they look great, and you just got to throw the ball to Justin Jefferson and off they go? Or is it going to say, on 3rd downs, he was probably going to look at Irv Smith, and Irv Smith isn't there now. And so these teams we're going to learn how they cover Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. We're going to learn who's out there taking the snaps when they get into 3 wide receiver situations. Do we see Amir Smith-Marset? Do we see KJ Osborne? So in a lot of ways, I think that this team in Cincinnati cannot really put up a fight defensively against the Vikings offense in terms of talent. But if they slow them down and look really good, I think we're going to say something's still up here.
Yeah, week 1 is when we learn the truth They can only conceal so much in training camp and preseason, but, cards are on the table now. So we're going to find out what kind of play caller Clint Kubiak really is over a 4-quarter stretch. We're going to find out if this offensive line can pass protect. But, I think the worst thing that could happen is if the defense gets carved up, because that's the group that was invested in. That's the group that's supposed to get this team back to the playoffs. The front office looked at the offense and said, "You're good." Excuse me. They didn't invest in the offense. They invested in the defense. So if a Cincinnati team were to carve them up, then there's going to be immediate panic. Now, that is a group that could come together as the season goes along. They get more continuity. But there's not a ton of talent on the Cincinnati offense for me to think there's any reason that they should outduel this Vikings defense. So I think that would be a huge concern. And if the Vikings can't get the ball to their major weapons, Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, if the Bengals really put an effort forward to shut them down and Minnesota has no recourse, it's 2018 all over again.
John adds, plenty of teams start slow and finish strong. Look at Tampa last year. Tampa had Tom Brady as their quarterback. I think that all rules do not apply when considering somebody like that. I think that really week one doesn't determine your whole season. What I'm saying is that you learn something right away about the team. I'm not saying that you see week one and decide who's winning the Super Bowl. It's just that we've gotten a vibe from the first week of the season every year that Kirk Cousins has been here. And even every year, 2017 is a great example. We saw them come out and steamroll the New Orleans Saints. And we saw the potential of that team offensively and defensively right off the bat against the New Orleans Saints. 2016, I think we saw right off the bat that their offensive line was bad. And Adrian Peterson couldn't run the ball in that game.
Blair Walsh was a problem.
Yeah, you can learn a lot. I'm not saying the season's over after week one. So before we wrap up, prediction.
Yeah, I gotta, if I'm going to plant my flag at 11-6, we got to have this win, right? So I'm going to go Vikings 20, and I only do weird scores. For the Bring Me the News audience, I only do scorigamis or obscure numbers. 25-22.
25-22.
It's a push against the spread.
I think the Vikings are going to blow out the Cincinnati Bengals. I think it will be, I'm going to go 27-13. I'm going to say it's a 2-score game. I just don't think that Joe Burrow coming back from this injury is going to be ready to face Mike Zimmer and his defense. So I appreciate everybody who's jumped on board. If you commented, if you watched on our Bring Me the News stream, or if you're listening on our podcasts, if you're here, check out all of our podcasts. Purple Insider. I just had a good conversation with Scott Studwell, Vikings legend, today. That's up on the podcast feed a little later today. So lots going on there. And our written work from TCO Performance Center at purpleinsider.substack.com. So we're both out there all the time. So make sure you check that out as well. purpleinsider.substack.com. Thank you, Sam. And thank you to Bring Me to the News for hosting us. And we'll catch you next Tuesday. We're going to be doing this every Tuesday from now on.